Plot twists in anime and manga come and go, and when they hit, they hit. Some hit like a freight train with a baseball bat, and some hit like crack in the 80s, but some hit very, very slowly with a moment of realization where you sit there like, oh shit. And Kagurabachi chapter 71 just dropped a massive one with big implications that I need to waffle to you guys about.
Sometimes you gotta close the door to open a window.
Lot that went on in this chapter, and a lot of it hit really hard and really close to home for me personally. So I'm gonna take a minute here, and I'm gonna take this all from the top and go down. Now this chapter opens up 9 years ago with a flashback to Iori as a child. Now remember, back in chapter 61, Iori mentioned how her dad left before she was even born, and her mum raised her herself. This is kind of true and also kind of false. Samora was present for Iori's early life. However, due to his divorce with Inori, Iori barely remembers him leaving Inori to raise Iori by herself. These names are going to get really confusing. Take a shot every time I say Iori or Inori. Also, like the video and subscribe. Now, I'm not sure if this was intentional or not, but Inori asks Samora how he expects Iori to remember him. And it kind of felt a little bit cheeky, kind of felt a little bit on the nose, considering the situation that we're in right now with all this memory stuff going on. But the general premise within this chapter is Samora reappears in Iori and Inori's lives due to Inori collapsing and being diagnosed with an undisclosed illness, which if I had to bet money on, I'd probably wager it to the big C. Cancer. Now, Inori tells Samora how he's gonna have to step up and take care of Iori, to which Samora replies he can't hold his daughter with these hands. Now, we will circle back to this in a little bit later, so keep it in your mind here. But this chapter further reinforces my beliefs and my assessments of Samora as a whole, as a character, and as a story, as a very complex and very hypocritical character and father to Iori. The more layers of complexity that we get of Samora, the more I enjoy this character. We definitely get some layers of complexity that come about within this chapter. Samora is confronted with reality of having to step up and be a father instead of being a deadbeat dad. Because let's be real here, he is a deadbeat dad. He chooses to walk out before any of this stuff even happens, and he remembers the violence he took part in during the war as Hokuzono treats us to a POV shot of Samora holding the enchanted blade Tobimune with the EI white style as he cuts down his enemies, which again, it seems strange seeing the POV of a blind man before he was blind. Very interesting choice from Hokuzono, but I respect it nonetheless. But speaking of being blind, Inori tells Samora that it's time to look forward and not back. Now, this line will become very, very important a little bit later on down, so again, keep that in mind. But in other words, get over your shit and take care of your child. Now, Inori also mentions that she has a sister working within the Kaminabi who's busy. Now, we don't actually get to meet her. Now, I'd wager that this was intentional by Hokuzono and was done for some reason. She's either in someone that we've met before, someone we haven't seen before, or someone who is high-ranking within the Kaminabi. But I have a few theories, but this video is going to be long enough, so I'd like to hear your theories about that one in the comments down below. The next portion of this chapter covers points in time over the course of a year, which is why it seems like Samora and Iori get on along so fast and so quickly here. We'll reference those points in time throughout the chapter. Anyway, Samora ends up taking Iori to his dojo, which is where he introduces her to the men within that dojo. Now, these guys kind of swarm Iori and try to reinforce just how much of a quote-unquote good guy Samora actually is, and how he's a war hero, and how if it wasn't for him, the country basically wouldn't exist. Now, this is obviously going to rub both Samora and Iori the wrong way. Samora because he doesn't consider himself a hero. Hell, he barely considers himself someone worthy to hold his own daughter. He only sees himself as a murderer, a sinner, a heretic, basically. And for Iori, for obvious reasons, her dad walked out on her, so she's obviously harboring some resentment towards him. She barely knows him, to which she reiterates to these guys, really? Who cares? You're not amazing. You abandoned mum. You're a loser. Now, in between this, we do get a look into the life that Iori and her mother shared, with Iori asking her mother, what was my father like? To which Inori replies, he's the worst. He's totally hung up on the past and he totally neglects us. Don't ever fall for a guy like this, Iori. Now, this further hammers home the complexities of Iori's life, her upbringing, her relationship with her mother and also her father, and we're shown small sequences of Iori's mother telling her she's going to be staying with Samora, and Inori promising Iori that she will be home safe before she knows it and she will kick this thing's stupid butt. Again, no direct mention of what this illness actually is that had befallen Inori Inori, but again, I'd wager it's the big C. However, we do cut back to Iori, who's now wielding a practice sword in an attempt to try and attack Samora with her eyes closed, and then bumps into a column within the room. So now we know where she got the habit from of closing her eyes, as we saw in the most recent chapters here. But I also do think that this is kind of poetic. Samora blinds himself because he could never deal with what it is that he saw on the battlefield. But Iori, she chose to close her eyes to the violence so as to not see it. It's the same result but different reasons. Iori's reasoning here is that she should fight on the same level as her enemy, with Samora realizing Iori sees him as the enemy here, which I thought was quite funny when I first read this out loud. It was quite funny. But more time passes and we see Samora and Iori visiting their mother in the hospital, and by this time around, Iori and Samora noticeably closer and a lot more father-daughter figures here in their own little unique way. Starting up contests with each other on cooking, but Iori is also shown here holding a knife in the EI White Purity style with her eyes closed once again. And now eventually Samora and Iori do talk about Iori's mother, with Iori mentioning how she used to cook with her all the time and that's how she got so good at it. Now she does start to look solemn here, and that's obviously at the thought of her mother, and now being distracted by Samora, who challenges her to another challenge on who can cook the best meal to cheer up Inori the best. Whoever does this is the winner. Now more time continues to pass by as Hokuzono demonstrates it through these small little still panels, and there's really this vibe of solemnness, melancholy, and just nostalgia, I guess, throughout this whole chapter, and you get a sense of impending doom and sadness that just is sort of spread throughout it. And ultimately, it leads us to the eventual death of Iori's mother. Now, I've talked about this before in the part of Samora in previous videos, but something I've really connected to within this storyline is Samora and his interest in doing what he perceives is the best course of action for Iori, for his daughter. Now, it might not be morally right what he is doing, but as a father myself, I can sort of empathize with Samora's choices. I can put myself into his shoes, and I can see why he makes these hard decisions. I can see why he would take these hard paths and potentially maybe ruin himself and potentially his daughter in favor of giving her the best start in life. Parenthood it's one of the scariest trials in life, and there is no guide for it. You just do what you hope is the best, and you pray that your child is going to turn out the best way possible based on your decisions. But on the other side, I also see why Iori is so upset with Samora, and as someone who has lost both parents personally, this chapter showing Inori's death, it really hit home to me personally for many, many reasons. But on top of this, it hit home even more that Iori has lived a life of lies due to her father's actions. For example, the woman she grew up with, the one that she introduced us to in chapter 62 as her mother, isn't even Iori's mother, meaning in real time right now, Iori is remembering not only her father, his decisions, his actions, and the trauma that comes along with all of that, she's also remembering the death of her mother that she forgot due to Samora's decisions and actions, which is just in and of itself tragic. And when you realize this, you realize Samora's actions not only caused Iori to forget Samora himself, but also she believed her mother was alive and well and looking after her this entire time. And when you realize all this, you can sort of realize and maybe empathize just why Samora's mindset took him to the decision that he made. Samora rebuilt his bond with his daughter over the course of a year and finally changed himself for the better, only for him to watch the mother of his daughter slowly pass away over the course of that year. And all of these events finally took Samora to a place where he finally felt he was able to hold his daughter and comfort her, rather than not being worthy to do so. And for the first time ever, Samora was finally starting to look forward. And this is only a really small panel, but the words, "I wish I could see her grow up," from Inori, upon my reread of this chapter, those words sent me over the edge. I am not lying when I say to you, I shed a tear reading that line out loud. This seemingly throwaway line hit me like a truck with an AK-47 and a baseball bat. It was insane. As a parent, there is not a more harrowing thought that I could think of than that line right there. Which brings me back full circle to Samora again. A man now after a year of growth who's changed not only in his own eyes but also in Inori's eyes. A man who now has the option to see his daughter grow up. See, sort of. A man who now has a new lease on life is now starting to look forward, and that's where Hokuzono hits us in the gut with the plot twist. As John Hishaku, Yora himself appears, telling Samora he's pleased to meet him. Now Samora tells him, "I don't know who you are, I don't know what you want, but you shouldn't make me draw my blade." But this is where Yori says something very interesting and extremely telling about himself in a subtle way. Instead of replying to Samora and what Samora says about drawing his blade, Yori says, "For the future, huh?" Which, in the context of the entire conversation, doesn't make any sense at all, as nothing said previously by Samora even remotely talks about the future or implies the future at all. The only thing mentioned here was Samora's thoughts about Inori telling him to look forward and not back. That's the only thing within a couple of pages of this meeting that implies somewhat mentions of the future. But this implies Samora should be looking forward to the future and not to the past based on what Inori says. And this inadvertently kind of implies that Yori can possibly read minds, which in and of itself is a terrifying thought, and it is a crackpot theory for myself and also many other members within the community here, but I'd also wager that this explains why Yori's plans always seem to go so perfectly so far within the series. But not only this, Yori tells Samora that he only wishes to speak to Samora about the sins you lot committed, and once again we are shown the Shinoichi Swordmaster. And finally, Yori mentions how in a few years from now, a disaster will befall this country as a result of those sins. And this is where we're shown a massive cityscape completely and utterly ruined with flowers blooming once again, hinting towards the Shinoichi being used. Now, personally, I believe this is a flash forward to a future event yet to come within the series rather than a possibility that this is to come. But this meeting between Yori and Samora is something that we've already had reference and told to us about in chapter 58 and 59, where in chapter 58, Samora tells Yoji, quote, "There is an evil far filthier than the Hishaku that must be punished, even if it takes colluding with the Hishaku. I'm talking about us, the sword bearers. 18 years ago, we covered up what happened there. We buried our crimes. Rokihira and the rest of us were lauded as heroes, and if that's what it took to restore society, we accepted that." End quote. Now, it is pretty clear that Samora is referencing what happened on the island of Shikoku. So the timeline on this is kind of blurry, but I'm assuming that on the same day Inori's funeral was held, where they are now comforting each other, Yori and Samora on the deck here, Kunishigi was murdered that same day. He was killed that same day. Now, right after that death, as mentioned by that other Hishaku member here, Yori went right to Samora and made the contract with him. But now we flash forward to present day, where recently in chapter 59, Samora mentioned how in a week's time, all of this will be over, which could be in reference to what Yori talked about a couple of years ago with Samora about this massive disaster. There is a lot to think about within this chapter. Hokuzono has given us a lot, and he just continues to give us insane stories for us to enjoy. And genuinely, this is a top 3 chapter for me in the entire series. Genuinely, I will take this series to my brain and engrave it in it. I've already reread this a couple of times now, and I feel like every time I reread it, or every time I just reread the series in general, my appreciation grows deeper for it. From going from really conflicted about Samora and Iori and their developments to now really fucking enjoying Samora, and genuinely maybe might even proclaim him to be the best antagonist within this series. And I'm not even sure you can call him an antagonist, more of an anti-villain, I guess. He's a moral grey area, and I think Hokuzono is doing a fantastic job at writing him in that way. But anyways, that is everything from me. I will catch you guys all in the next one. Much fucking love, big fucking kisses, and I'll catch you guys all in the next one. Peace.